in our court. Are you ready for more? I am back again with the distinct honor of welcoming Justice Riggs. We are already knowing that you know exactly who she is and what she does. But we are still going to give her the introduction she deserves. Justice Allison Riggs has spent her entire career fighting for equal justice under the law for every North Carolinian. In law school, she worked with hundreds of people in her community who had lost their right to vote as a result of interaction with the criminal justice system. After law school, Justice Riggs spent 14 years as a civil rights and voting rights attorney at the Southern Coalition for Social Justice in Durham, North Carolina. She eventually served as co-executive director for programs and chief counsel for voting rights. In that role, she worked with communities across the South to advocate for fair elections and safe and healthy environments. She has argued before the U.S. Supreme Court twice in landmark redistricting cases. Governor Cooper appointed Riggs to the Court of Appeals in 2023, and then to the North Carolina Supreme Court. A majority of North Carolinians elected Justice Riggs to return to her North Carolina Supreme Court seat in 2024. And without further ado, welcome Justice Allison Riggs.
Thank you for the kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Justice Allison Riggs from the North Carolina Supreme Court. I was elected to keep my seat on the North Carolina Supreme Court. And I am committed to fighting tirelessly to ensure that the will of North Carolina voters is respected. I will apologize in advance just to explain that I'm going to dart at the end because my 11-year-old niece is having a birthday party this evening and I cannot miss that. So if I don't get to say hello or hug you afterwards, please know it's because of her. But I really appreciate the opportunity to spend a few minutes talking to you about why I joined the bench and why even before I joined the bench, I valued work to make judicial accountability a more central part of our larger voter engagement work, why our state courts matter, and obviously I wouldn't leave without telling you about some of the work that I'll be doing and that many of you will also be doing to make sure that every lawful ballot cast by every eligible voter counts. So I have always known and thought that state courts matter. State courts matter even more in recent years. In 2019, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a case that I argued, decided that the federal Constitution doesn't put any limits on extreme partisan gerrymandering. No matter how bad it is, no matter how much it dilutes your votes and frustrates the will of voters in this country, the U.S. Supreme Court has said there's nothing the federal courts will do. But what they did say was that your state courts, applying your state constitutions, might have something different to say about that. So the fight against gerrymandering, the front of that battle is in our state courts. The other thing is that in 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and sent this issue of do women get to decide what happens to their own bodies back to state legislators, which meant that state courts ultimately get to decide on the access that women have to health care. And so ramped up the importance of our state courts. And here in North Carolina, I have been honored to see and learn from some incredible jurists like Justice Anita Earls, who was elected in 2018. Her seat is up in 2026, just so no one forgets that important piece of nonpartisan information. And so I knew what it looks like to have a good state jurist. Unfortunately, in 2020 and 2022, and when I speak about judicial elections, I wish I wasn't speaking in stark partisan terms, but the legislature decided to make judicial elections partisan. So I am not injecting partisanism into elections, I'm reporting facts. Every Democrat who ran for statewide judicial office in 2020 and 2022 lost. And that meant that the majority of the North Carolina Supreme Court changed. The majority that I believe was delivering on its promise to uphold our state constitution had said, in a case that I was honored to argue, that our state constitution puts boundaries on extreme partisan gerrymandering, and our state constitution demands free and fair elections. And after the 22 election, that majority changed, and the new North Carolina Supreme Court decided never mind on that, and has indicated that the state courts will not rein in extreme partisan gerrymandering. So I wake up every day knowing how important it is not just to govern well, not just to stand firm in our constitutional convictions, but that it is critically important to restore to the North Carolina Supreme Court a majority of jurists who will put people over politics and will, no matter what, will not bow to bullying, intimidation, or political pressure, that they will stand up for you and your right. It is what you deserve. I could spend a lot more time talking about the importance of our state courts, what I see happening over the next few election cycles. Before I sort of shift into the news of over the last 8 days, I just want to thank you all for doing the work that you're already doing or that you're going to do even more on judicial accountability. So I am a person who believes that it is important that we engage in not just transactional GOTV and voter educational, but transformational GOTV and voter education. And that means giving voters the information that they need to be able to tell between who's going to be a good judge who will respect the Constitution and who won't. And that sometimes means stepping into an area that a lot of us may not historically be comfortable talking about, right? Because when we talk about judicial elections, sometimes the candidates may not be the most engaging. We won't let that happen anymore. Sometimes we get thrown a lot of legal jargon at us. Originalism is one that I hear a lot of Republican registered candidates talking about. The idea that all that matters in interpreting our state constitution is what land-owning white men believed when they wrote these documents. And as someone who understands how racism, sexism, and classism still operate to the detriment of everyday North Carolinians within our justice system, we have to demand that the people who serve us are willing to speak boldly on those topics, and that it is not inappropriate for a judge to tell you, the voters, about their values. We don't say how we're going to vote on a case. But we do owe it to you to give you enough information to make informed decision about us. So thank you in advance for many of the discussions that you've had today, I know, about keeping folks engaged in this fight for our courts. Over the last 8 days, a lot has changed in my situation. I won my election by 734 votes in November, and many of you may have heard me talk about, in the run-up to the election, another number, 401 votes. 401 votes are the number of votes we fell short in keeping Chief Justice Sherry Beasley in her spot. And we knew that statewide judicial elections were going to be tight. We knew it. And in fact, because I'm a former voting rights attorney, I also knew that, particularly since the 2020 election, there are a lot of folks out there who continue to try to develop a playbook to allow them to selectively decide which election results they're going to respect, or to selectively decide which voters they're going to let pass through or have their votes count. And that is not acceptable to me. I hired my legal team before Election Day because I knew this could happen. It would happen. I wanted a seat at the table. I didn't realize I'd be sitting at that table just by my lonesome. But you know what? I am raised in the tradition of community lawyering and movement lawyering. I am raised in the tradition of understanding that our service members in North Carolina and across this country, that they make sacrifices and their families make sacrifices to serve our country and to protect our fundamental freedoms. And I will not let their votes be discounted. So, let me step back for a second and say, after the election, my opponent decided to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what stuck. And he challenged voters in 3 different categories and said their votes shouldn't be counted. The first category implicated about 60,000 North Carolina voters, including both of my parents. And I'll repeat, both of my parents. And my dad is retired military, 30 years, was deployed in wartime. He and my mom registered to vote in person with a host of documents, but they handed their military IDs first. And their military IDs don't have driver's license numbers on them, because, of course, and they don't have social security numbers on them for security reasons. But they are acceptable forms of ID. They presented themselves in person and have registered and have been voting with no problem since then. My mom, when she went to vote for me this fall, handed her North Carolina driver's license. So you can imagine my parents, like so many other North Carolinians, were shocked to hear that someone was trying to disenfranchise them. The next category were voters who voted under a federal law called the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Voting Act, UOCAVA. I tend to speak in acronyms sometimes. It's the election law nerd in me, but these are voters, military voters. They may be military voters stationed domestically. They're North Carolina residents. They love this state, but they're serving on a base in Kansas or Washington State. And their family members are entitled to use this mechanism of voting. They may be military members serving overseas in bases in Italy or South Korea, and their family members. They may be military members serving in classified ways in dangerous parts of the country, of the world. They may be military members who have been serving on the battlefronts in war zones. They are foreign service officers who are working to make this whole entire world a safer place to live and be. And my opponent is seeking to toss out their votes because, like every other voter in the entire country, regardless of what state voter ID laws are in effect, these voters did not have to copy their ID and send it in. You can imagine that might be challenging for a submariner. Congress decided that military voting has been so hard that they made these interventions to make it easier for members of our armed services to vote. And 95% of them who use this mechanism use an online portal where you're not even able to transmit a copy of a photo ID. So those voters, and then the last voters are voters who are the children of overseas military members or folks living abroad who turn 18, who've lived with their families abroad, who turn 18 and are eligible to vote. The Republican legislature in 2011 unanimously said that those voters get to vote in North Carolina. Those children of folks, military members and folks living overseas get to vote in North Carolina, and it has not been challenged once in 14 years, until now. For the first time ever, 8 days ago, the North Carolina Court of Appeals, the first time ever a court has approved the tossing out of ballots cast by voters who followed every rule in a way that would overturn the outcome of an election. Now, first, the good news. My court yesterday, I sit on the Supreme Court. I continue to sit on the Supreme Court. I recused from the case involving my election because I feel like I shouldn't have to explain that, and don't to many of you, but that should be the norm, not the exception. My court issued a decision that reversed the Court of Appeals on the 60,000 voters. So those voters' votes are safe for the November 2024 election. But they gave the green light to the discounting of voters, these overseas and military voters, and the children of overseas and military voters. And we think that this is in the neighborhood of about 7,000 voters. Of those UACAVA voters, the voters who voted using this federal law and were told explicitly that they did not have to make a copy of their ID and send it in. I repeat, they were told explicitly they didn't have to do that. My opponent didn't challenge all of those voters. He challenged those voters in 4 of North Carolina's 100 counties. If you are wondering which counties those are, we are standing in one of them, Durham County. He challenged Durham County, Guilford County, Buncombe County, and Cumberland County, 4 of the most Democratic counties in the entire state, not the other ones. And we now have a court saying, that's okay. I knew this fight would get settled in federal court because it's where it needed to be all along. Federal law and the federal Constitution prohibit what my opponent is seeking to do. It prohibits the invalidation, the disenfranchisement of military votes in 4 Democratic counties, but nowhere else. It prohibits changing election laws after the election is already conducted. Kindergartners on a playground understand this basic concept of fairness, that you cannot challenge the rules of a game after the game is over and you lost. And so I promise to everyone, but certainly to the 7,000 voters whose fundamental right to be heard in the political process is at stake, that I will not give an inch on their rights. There is nothing less constitutionally problematic about only disenfranchising 7,000 people instead of 67,000 people. And in fact, I would not accept one eligible voter being disenfranchised. Beatrice is trying to keep me on time, but I got a couple more things to say, so I'll drive a little faster. We have a fight left ahead of us. I am eager and willing to take on this fight in federal court because I wake up every day knowing that voters trusted me. They put their faith in me to be an independent jurist who would stand strong in her constitutional convictions no matter what. Voters kept faith with me. I will keep faith with voters. But there is still work to be done because this is what we do. We fight for each other. We fight for people who don't even agree with us. I have talked to so many voters over the last 5.5 months who are almost cautious in talking to me because they didn't vote for me. And I'm like, you know what? You are just as deserving of my commitment to your rights as someone who did vote for me. That's what you elected, and that's what I'm going to deliver. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, because I don't do this work alone. I stand arm in arm with every one of you in this room. I stand arm in arm with groups that have been fighting for years for the precious right to vote. I stand on the shoulders of people who have fought, bled, and died for that precious right. And we will not let them down. And while we fight in federal court, we also know that we have to make sure that even though this burden shouldn't be placed on those voters, we're going to fight for them. We are going to make sure that they do whatever it takes to get their vote counted. And we're going to be loud about how they shouldn't have to do it, but the work that we have to do changed dramatically in the last 24 hours. So I want you to know that as we fight in the court, there is also incredibly powerful work being done to make sure that every one of these voters knows what happened. 6 months after an election, it's not going to be easy work, and it's not going to be even as easily divisible work. Here's your turf, here's your turf, here's your turf. But guess what? Almost every one of you, I would bet, is on some social media platform. Or every one of you has a phone tree or text threads or ways in which you can reach out to people who voted in November who might be implicated by yesterday's ruling. Members of our military, members of people who, and members of their family, people who have served our country, are serving our country. Don't just think about overseas, think about people who are stationed at different bases. Think about students who are studying abroad in the fall. It does not hurt to reach out to every person that you can think of to let them know about this and to let them know that they can copy their ID and email it to a Board of Elections official. That's guidance we just got from the State Board of Elections on Thursday. I hope that is unnecessary in the end because no one should have to jump through extra hoops. But I know that if anyone is up to the task, it's North Carolina. And I want you all to know that the eyes of the country are on the people in this state. Not just because we're a swing state, not just because we're always in the news, but because we are people of resilience, we are people of community, we take care of one another, and we're gonna show the country what it looks like to fight in tough times. And so I want each of you to walk out of this room feeling like I feel right now, which is energized, supported, of a mind to solve these challenges and to hold people accountable for these challenges. So thank you all so much for your time. Sorry again to be darting, but really thank you to Sailor Jones, Bob Phillips, Beatrice, all of the wonderful people, I can't list them all, but all of the wonderful people who put this event on and worked so hard to make sure that we fight for our courts. Thank you.